the silence between them. The wind moved like a whisper through the desert, brushing against the edges of the Apache camp as though it carried secrets no one dared to speak aloud. Fires burned low, their embers glowing like tired eyes in the night, and beyond them stood the tent of Chief Atsa, a place of authority, strength, and an unspoken sorrow that had lingered far too long. Inside, silence ruled more fiercely than any leader. Naya sat near the entrance, her small hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. She had not spoken in 4 years. Not a word, not a sound. Only the quiet rhythm of breath that proved she was still present in a world she seemed unwilling to join. Once, her laughter had filled the camp like birdsong at dawn. Now, even her footsteps made no noise. Elena watched her from across the dimly lit space, her chest tightening with a familiar ache. She had tried everything, stories, songs, gentle coaxing, but nothing reached her daughter anymore. It was as if the child had retreated behind an invisible wall, one no mother's love could break through. "She will speak when she chooses," Chief Atsa said from the shadows, his voice steady but distant. Elena turned toward him, her expression strained. "It has been 4 years." Atsa didn't respond immediately. He stood tall, his presence commanding even in stillness. Yet there was a rigidity to him now, a hardness that had not always been there. Leadership had carved something unyielding into his spirit, leaving little room for softness, especially within his own home. "She is strong," he finally replied. "She does not need to speak to prove it." Elena lowered her eyes, not in agreement, but in resignation. Strength, to Atsa, had always meant endurance without expression. Pain was something to be buried, not shared. But she knew better. She lived in the quiet aftermath of that belief every day. Naya shifted slightly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her dress. For a brief moment, her eyes flickered toward her father, but whatever thought passed through her mind vanished as quickly as it came. The silence returned, thicker than before. Outside, the camp stirred with unease. A group of warriors approached, their movements purposeful. Among them was Tahu, his expression alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings before settling on the entrance of Atsa's tent. "Chief," he called, his tone respectful but urgent. "We have returned." Atsa stepped outside, leaving Elena and Naya behind. The night air carried the tension of something new, something unexpected. Tahu gestured toward a figure being led forward, a man unlike any in the camp. His clothes were torn, his face marked with exhaustion, but there was a quiet composure in his posture that set him apart. His hands were bound, yet he did not struggle. "A prisoner," Tahu said. "We found him near the river. He does not belong to any tribe we know." The man lifted his gaze, meeting Atsa's eyes without defiance, but without fear either. "What is your name?" Atsa asked. "Daniel," he replied, his voice calm despite his condition. A murmur passed through the warriors. The name sounded foreign, unfamiliar against the rhythm of their language. Atsa studied him for a moment, weighing something unseen. "You will remain here until we decide your fate." Daniel gave a slight nod, as though he expected nothing more. As the warriors led him away, Elena stepped just outside the tent, her curiosity drawing her closer despite herself. She watched as the stranger disappeared into the darkness, something about his presence lingering in her thoughts longer than it should have. Behind her, Naya had moved. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but for the first time in years, the child had risen on her own and taken a step forward. Her eyes were fixed in the direction the prisoner had gone, her expression unreadable but no longer empty. Elena noticed her breath catching. "Naya," she whispered gently, but the girl said nothing. She simply stood there listening to what Elena could not tell. The camp gradually settled, the tension easing into a restless quiet. Night deepened, wrapping everything in shadow, yet sleep did not come easily. Later, when the fires had burned low and most had retreated into silence, a sound drifted through the darkness. It was faint at first, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. It was a voice, Elena stirred, her eyes opening as the melody reached her. It was unlike anything she had heard before. Gentle, sorrowful, yet strangely comforting. The kind of sound that seemed to carry both loss and hope in equal measure. She stepped outside, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The voice came from where the prisoner was held. Daniel sat alone, his back against a wooden post, his gaze lifted toward the stars as he sang quietly to himself. There was no audience, no performance, just a man and his song, as though it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Elena stood still, listening. For the first time in a long while, the silence around her didn't feel empty. Behind her, unnoticed, Naya had followed. The child stood at the edge of the shadows, her small figure motionless as she listened to the unfamiliar melody. Something in her expression shifted, something fragile, something awakening. The song continued, threading its way through the night, touching places words never could. And for the first time in 4 years, the silence did not feel unbreakable. The distance that closes. Morning arrived without warmth. The desert sun climbed steadily, casting sharp light across the camp. Yet the air between its people remained tense and watchful. Word of the prisoner had spread quickly, carried in hushed voices and wary glances. Outsiders were not welcomed. Not here, not ever. And yet this one had not resisted, had not pleaded, had not even shown fear. That alone made him unsettling. Elena felt it too. She moved through her morning duties with practiced ease, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, back to the sound she had heard in the night. The melody had not left her. It lingered in fragments, echoing faintly in her mind, stirring something she had long buried beneath routine and quiet endurance. Across the camp, Naya sat near the same place as always, still and withdrawn. But something had changed. Her gaze no longer drifted aimlessly. Instead, it fixed often toward the far end of the camp, toward where the prisoner was kept. Elena noticed. It was the first time in years that Naya had shown interest in anything beyond her own silence, and that frightened her almost as much as it gave her hope. By midday, the heat pressed heavily against the earth. Atsa stood among his warriors, discussing matters of territory and safety, his voice firm, his attention unwavering. Yet even in his authority, there was distance, a separation not just from his people, but from everything beyond his duty. He did not look toward his home. He did not look toward his daughter. Elena watched him from afar, her expression unreadable. There had been a time when his presence brought her comfort, when his voice softened at the sound of her name. But that man felt like a memory now, one replaced by someone harder, someone unreachable. And in that distance, something within her had begun to shift. That afternoon, she carried a small bowl of water and food toward the edge of the camp. She told herself it was an act of kindness, nothing more. Daniel sat where he had been left, his hands still bound, though loosely now. A guard stood nearby, watchful but uninterested. The prisoner's head was slightly bowed, his posture calm despite the circumstances. When Elena approached, he looked up. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, there was no tension, only recognition. She placed the bowl beside him without speaking. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. His voice was different in the daylight, clearer, steadier, yet carrying the same quiet weight she had heard in his song. Elena hesitated before replying. No one deserves to be left without water. He studied her for a moment, as though considering something deeper than her words. Kindness is rare in places where fear leads. She glanced toward the guard, lowering her voice. "This place is not what you think." "And what do you think I believe?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly, as though preparing to leave, but something held her there. Perhaps it was the way he spoke, or the absence of judgment in his tone. Perhaps it was simply that he listened. "When you sang last night," she said finally, "what was it for?" Daniel's gaze shifted briefly to the horizon before returning to her. "For someone I lost." The words were simple, but they carried a depth Elena understood immediately. Loss had a way of reshaping everything. "I used to sing too," she admitted, almost to herself. "What made you stop?" She paused, The answer sat heavily in her chest, unspoken but present in every part of her life. There was no one left to hear it. Daniel didn't respond right away. He didn't offer comfort or empty reassurance. He simply nodded, as though her words made perfect sense. And somehow that was enough. From a distance, unseen by either of them, Naya watched. She had followed quietly, her small figure hidden behind the edge of a nearby structure. Her eyes remained fixed on Daniel, her expression no longer empty but searching, curious in a way she had not been for years. The sound of voices did not reach her, but something else did. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the camp, the melody returned. Softer this time, closer. Daniel sang again, not loudly, not for attention, but with the same quiet sincerity as before. The notes carried gently through the air, weaving through the silence like something alive. Elena stood just beyond the edge of the light, listening. She hadn't meant to come back, but she had, and this time she didn't stay far. "You sing as if someone is still listening," she said softly. Daniel glanced toward her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his expression. "Maybe they are." She stepped closer, her movements cautious but deliberate. "Or maybe you just don't want to be alone. Does anyone?" he asked. The question lingered between them, heavier than it should have been. Elena felt it settle somewhere deep within her, in a place she had tried not to acknowledge for a long time. "I should go," she said, though she didn't move. Daniel didn't stop her, but he didn't look away either. Behind her, in the darkness, Naya stood once more, closer now than before. The sound of the song seemed to hold her in place, drawing her forward step by step, even as she fought against it. Her fingers trembled slightly at her sides. Her lips parted just barely, but no sound came. Not yet. The song continued, soft and unbroken. And with it, something fragile began to take shape, something dangerous, something inevitable, something that would not remain hidden for long. The moment that breaks, the night carried a tension that could no longer be mistaken for silence. It lingered in the air, woven into every glance, every restrained breath, every step taken with care. What had once been hidden beneath routine now pressed against the surface, threatening to reveal itself. Elena felt it most. She stood at the edge of the camp, her hands clasped tightly as though holding herself together. She had told herself she would not return again, that whatever fragile connection had formed between her and the prisoner would end before it became something irreversible. But resolve, she had come to realize, was weakest where loneliness had taken root. And so, she returned. Daniel was already awake when she approached, his figure outlined faintly by the dying firelight. He did not seem surprised to see her this time, as though her presence had become something expected, something understood without needing words. "You came back," he said quietly. Elena exhaled, her voice steady but low. "I shouldn't have." "Then why did you?" The question was simple, but it left no room for evasion. She looked at him, really looked this time, not as a prisoner, not as an outsider, but as someone who had seen her in a way no one else had in years. There was no demand in his expression, no pressure, only patience. "That's exactly why," she answered. Something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them named but both recognized. It was not sudden, nor reckless. It had grown slowly, quietly, in the spaces left empty by everything else. And now it was undeniable. Daniel shifted slightly, his bound hands resting loosely in front of him. "This path doesn't end without consequence." Elena nodded. "I know," but she did not step away. The distance between them had already closed long before this moment. Behind them, unseen, the camp slept in uneasy stillness. All except one. Naya moved like a shadow, her small feet silent against the ground. She had followed the sound again, not just the song this time, but the voices. Something about them held her, pulled her forward despite the fear that had kept her silent for so long. She stopped just beyond the light, her wide eyes fixed on the two figures before her. Daniel noticed her first. His gaze shifted past Elena, softening as it landed on the child. "You're not alone tonight," he murmured. Elena turned, her breath catching when she saw Naya standing there, closer than she had ever come. "Naya," she whispered. The child didn't move, but she didn't retreat either. Daniel's voice gentled further, as though speaking to something fragile. "It's all right," he said, not to Elena, but to the girl. "You don't have to be afraid of the sound." Naya's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Her breathing grew uneven, her chest rising and falling as though something inside her struggled to break free. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Daniel began to sing. The melody was different this time, deeper, fuller, carrying a quiet ache that seemed to stretch far beyond the night itself. It spoke of distance, of longing, of something lost, but not forgotten. Elena felt it immediately, but Naya felt something more. She took a step forward, then another. Each movement was hesitant, as though she expected the world to stop her. But nothing did. The song continued, steady and unbroken, guiding her closer until she stood just within the edge of the firelight. Her eyes remained locked on Daniel. Her lips parted, and then a sound, so faint it could have been mistaken for breath. But it wasn't. Elena froze. Daniel's voice faltered for the briefest moment before continuing, softer now, as though careful not to disrupt what was unfolding. Naya's expression shifted, something breaking through the stillness that had defined her for years. Her throat tightened, her body trembling with effort, and then, barely audible, "Stay." The word slipped from her lips like something fragile, something newly born. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. For 4 years, there had been nothing. And now there was this. Daniel fell silent, his gaze steady, his presence calm, as though he understood the weight of what had just happened. But the moment did not remain theirs alone. A voice cut through the night. "Enough." The single word shattered everything. Chief Atsa stepped into the firelight, his expression carved from anger and disbelief. Behind him, Tahu stood watchful, his suspicion now confirmed. Elena's breath caught. "Atsa, you would bring our daughter here?" His voice thundered, though it never rose. To him, his gaze shifted to Daniel, sharp and unyielding. "An outsider, a prisoner. It's not what you think," Elena said quickly, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Atsa's eyes returned to her. "Then tell me what it is." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth revealed itself. The silence between them was no longer the same. It was no longer empty. It was broken. Tahu stepped forward slightly. "The tribe has seen enough," he said. "This cannot be ignored." Atsa said nothing for a long moment. Then coldly, decisively, "He will be judged at sunrise." Elena's heart dropped. Naya flinched at the shift in tone, her small voice gone as quickly as it had come. She stepped back, retreating once more into herself, the fragile thread of sound already unraveling. Daniel remained still, his expression unchanged. But Elena felt it, the weight of consequence, of choice, of everything that had led to this moment. And as Atsa turned away, taking the night's fragile peace with him, only one truth remained clear. What had begun in silence would not end without loss. The voice that remains. Dawn arrived without mercy. The first light of morning stretched across the desert like a blade, cutting through the last remnants of night and exposing everything that could no longer be hidden. The camp stirred slowly, but the usual rhythm was gone. In its place was a quiet heaviness, as though every breath carried the weight of what was to come. Elena had not slept. She stood outside the tent, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her thoughts tangled between fear and regret. What had once felt distant and unspoken had now taken form. Real, undeniable, and impossible to escape. Behind her, Naya sat in silence once more. The single word she had spoken the night before lingered like a fragile echo, but it had not returned. Her expression had retreated inward again, her small frame drawn tight as though the world had become too loud, too sudden. Elena turned toward her, kneeling slowly. "Naya," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope and desperation. "You spoke to me. I heard you. No response. Only silence. Elena swallowed hard, her chest tightening. "You can do it again," she urged gently. "You're not alone." But the moment had passed, slipping through her fingers like something she could not hold on to. A shadow fell across them. Chief Atsa stood nearby, his presence firm, his expression unreadable. There was no anger in his eyes now, only something colder, something resolved. "It is time," he said. Elena rose quickly. "Atsa, please. The decision has been made." His voice left no room for argument. Still, she stepped closer, her composure breaking. "He helped her," she insisted. "You saw it. You heard her." "I heard a mistake," Atsa interrupted sharply. "One that will not be repeated." The word struck harder than anger ever could. Elena stared at him, searching for something, anything, that resembled the man she once knew. She spoke, she said, her voice unsteady. For the first time in 4 years, she spoke. Atsa's jaw tightened, but he did not look at Naya. "Because of him," Elena continued. "Not because of us." The truth lingered between them, heavy and unavoidable. For a brief moment, something flickered in Atsa's expression, uncertainty, perhaps. But it vanished just as quickly, buried beneath pride and duty. "He is still a threat," Atsa said. "And you?" His gaze hardened as it settled on her. "You have forgotten your place." Elena did not respond, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set in motion. The center of the camp filled gradually, the tribe gathering in silence. No one spoke openly, but the tension was unmistakable. This was not just judgment, it was a reckoning. Daniel stood where they had placed him, his hands now bound more tightly. Yet there was no struggle in him, no visible fear. He seemed almost distant, as though he had already accepted what the morning would bring. But his eyes searched the crowd, until they found Elena. She held his gaze, her breath unsteady, her heart caught between guilt and something deeper, something she could no longer deny. There had been a line, and she had crossed it, not with touch alone, not with words, but with something far more dangerous. Connection. Atsa stepped forward, his voice carrying across the gathered people. "This man does not belong to us," he declared. "He has brought disruption into our home, and for that, he will answer." The finality in his tone sent a ripple through the crowd. Elena took a step forward. "No," but her voice faltered, because she knew she had no power here, not against tradition, not against him. The silence stretched, and then a sound, small, fragile, but unmistakable. "No." Every head turned. Naya stood at the edge of the crowd, her small figure trembling, her wide eyes fixed on the scene before her. Her voice, though quiet, carried further than anything else in that moment. Elena's breath caught. Atsa froze. Naya took another step forward, her fear evident in every movement, but she did not stop. "No," she said again, stronger this time, as though pulling the word from somewhere deep within herself. "Don't." The crowd shifted, murmurs rising in disbelief. Atsa turned slowly, his gaze locking onto his daughter. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as silence, not as absence, but as a voice. "Naya," he said, her name unfamiliar on his tongue in that moment. She swallowed hard, her small hands clenched at her sides. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice did not disappear this time. "He sings," she whispered, "and it's not bad." The simplicity of her words struck deeper than anything else could have. Elena covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Daniel said nothing. He simply watched. Atsa stood unmoving, caught between two forces he could no longer ignore, his role as a leader and the truth standing before him as a father. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was no longer empty. It was filled with choice. Slowly, Atsa exhaled. Then, without looking at anyone else, he spoke. "Release him." The words sent a wave through the crowd. Tahu stepped forward, hesitation clear in his posture. "Chief." "He leaves," Atsa said firmly, "and he does not return." It was not mercy, but it was not death. The bindings were cut. Daniel flexed his hands briefly, his gaze shifting once more to Elena. There was no smile, no relief, only a quiet understanding of what had been given and what had been lost. He stepped back, then turned, and walked away. Elena did not follow. She couldn't. Her place, her reality, held her where she stood. But something within her had already changed. Naya moved closer, her small hand slipping into Elena's. This time, when Elena looked down at her, there was no silence waiting there. Only possibility. Behind them, Atsa remained still, watching the man disappear into the distance. And for the first time in years, the silence within his home no longer belonged to his daughter. It belonged to him.